Hey, everybody. Thanks again, Mitch. That was a fantastic talk. It's been a fantastic event so far. And our next speaker has been doing incredible work both on the forefront and behind the scenes. He is a professor at Stanford University, and he's been doing incredible research on this topic for just about a decade now. He's, he's the owner of several patents and companies dealing with technologies, and he's just been doing incredible work. So everybody, welcome Dr. Garry Nolan.
Alien metamaterials. I got to keep a close eye on them. Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you to all the organizers. It's great. And thank you guys for your interest. And frankly, thanks to Mitch, that was such a powerful set of statements that he made that I feel like he's just underlined everything that we've been talking about offline with other individuals about how do we get around the problem of the skeptics. And I wanted to give an example of something of what Mitch was actually just talking about, again, from my mainstream work, because it is that sort of liminal boundary space that we need to bring both sides of the extremes, both the far woo, let's call it, and the far hard sciences to that place at the middle where we can reach across some bridge or create a bridge of attempt to understand. So in cancer, for instance, there's a place where the immune system comes together with the cancer. And without going into all the gory details of it, we developed the mathematics around which we find that as cells group together for some, let's say, transient abstract function that most immunologists don't understand, there'll be a large area of them that come together and a large area of another kind of cells that come together and they're doing something. And it turns out that it's not the large grouping and of how it is that they're functioning that's as important. It's what's happening at the boundary. And so we had a big paper that just came out that said it's in here at the boundary that interesting things are happening. This is where we can, out of a single biopsy from the patient, look and do perturbation experiments because boundaries of perturbation. So it's the same thing that, for those who might have been following Twitter, that I occasionally go on, much to my detriment, is when we're talking about obvious small paper about oh, there it goes. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm not used to this. So Avi's paper, where he basically was saying, look, because the distance measurements were so up, I could just as easily believe that those things were 10 times closer than they were. And so the whole idea of them being UAPs, but traveling at superluminal velocities, et cetera, could be wrong. I mean, he wasn't saying they were wrong. He's just saying that because there was such a divergence in the distance, even people within the community, on the inside, were a little pissed that he didn't consider UAPs. And my point is, he shouldn't, right? If you're going to publish a paper in science, you have to use the language of science, and you might dare put it in the discussion where you're allowed to speculate, but I think that's the right way. And so, and he's coming from a place where I think 6 or 7 months ago, he wouldn't have even considered UAPs as part of even a discussion. But now I know that aspects of the Galileo project are at least looking for them. Now, I come from the other side of this. I come from the side where I do know that there's something going on, right? I mean, not the least of which I saw something, right? And you all know those stories. But I know that there's people on my mainstream side that I need to convince of something. So I need to use the language that they speak to drag them closer to the center. And then because I'm on your side, I need to teach you, or I'm trying to teach at least people who are listening. I consider my, 20,000 people on my Twitter feed kind of my online class. Here's the language that you use. And the first one that you've probably heard is me saying, get them to believe the data. If you can make them understand that the data is real, there is no escape. Right? They will have to think about, and you don't let them ask you what the data means. Ask them what they think the data means. Because asking a question, actually, it's a very rabbinical approach. Asking a question is an attack on the mind. That's why teachers ask questions. Hey, Gary, pay attention. Stop looking out the window. And they ask a question because it's an attack on the mind. And actually, if you do the neurological studies, you see that a question lights up the fight or flight area. And so ask them the question, and if they don't want to answer, that's okay. But you've probably planted a seed in their minds that will take them somewhere to understand that there's a different outcome than just saying no, or the incredible evidence need incredible, claims, or whatever that stupid thing is. And so, yes, I understand that that's really the case, but it's not. It shouldn't be something that's used all the time, just like Occam's razor. You can cut yourself with Occam's razor. And so let's just move away from that. So that's part of what I think we as a community need to do, is start to learn the language of science, of how it is that you convince people with evidence, and don't retreat to, okay, well, it's a quantum field of blah 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 that explains this. No, just like, okay, well, at least show that it can't be something which is normal physics, right? So and there's ways that you can do that. So my challenge was, at least online to people, is if you don't agree with Avi, prove that the distance metric is where the Ukrainians said that it is, right? Or show that there were no artillery around at the time. And then the conversation starts respectfully. And that's really, I think, part of what Mitch was just talking about. So it was a perfect launching point from that. So that was really what I wanted to start with, just to kind of get the flavor of where I want to go. And now we're going to move into some of the questions that people wanted to have. And we have some that are from basically online, and then maybe we'll take some from in here. I feel much better giving, I'm not as good as Mitch is, that he just did, at being able to just, go off.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Gary. From the questions that have come through online, which have been absolutely fantastic, we'll take a couple, and then we'll start moving into some from the room, and we'll go back and forth. Gary,
is there some water? Can somebody get me a water bottle or something? Non-psychedelically laced. Then I'll really start saying some interesting stuff. Truth serum.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Gary, I'll just, as Kelly gets that water, one question that came in was, I'm curious if you've looked at if there are similarities between brain abnormalities in experiencers and lifelong meditators. The range of values is specific because it's mentioned in the Gard et al. 2015 paper. I assume you know what that means. I certainly don't. Related to understanding how contemplative practices affect brain functional organization. I ask also because throughout ET contact cases, there's often consistent messages from these others regarding...
Okay, stop.
Okay. Sounds good. Yep.
Okay. We can get to the second part in a second.
For sure.
Okay, so the question is about brain structures related to, let's say, extra normal capabilities, right? And as you all know, in the work that I had done with Kit Green and actually Colin Kelleher and Jacques and Al Puthoff, we were all working more or less together at this time, looking at these patients who had been harmed by one or more different modalities. We noticed a common feature amongst them, which was an area, a density in the head of the caudate and putamen in the basal ganglia. All right, and I've talked about this, and if you don't know about it, there's probably a few good websites that would follow up on it if you wanted to go read them. But the long and the short of it was that there was much more neural connections in this area of the brain than we found compared to so-called normal people, the muggles, right? It's dangerous. That's very dangerous. That's okay. My secret admirer out there will surely title his next blog about this. So the issue is, okay, well, wow, this is interesting. And we actually first thought when we saw it that it was some kind of damage. We thought that it was part of the damage, the random damage that we were seeing, but random damage doesn't show up in the same place all the time. So when we went into the literature, we found that this particular level of density actually wasn't observed in most people. And so then, for those of you who know the story, Kit went and looked at 100 random people from basically standard databases, showed that that density level was not there. And he actually came up with the conclusion that he called them high functioning. He would sometimes use the word savant, et cetera. But basically people of high function who had, let's say, certain abilities. Well, not abilities, they just were high functioning individuals, smart people. But it was when he threw in a couple of individuals who were so-called remote viewers that it really hit home what we thought we were seeing. It was the remote viewers that actually were at the top of the scale in terms of the density. So that was interesting. And, coincidences don't often happen in anywhere. I mean, in biology especially. And it's not a conclusion, but it's a speculation. And again, I'm going to use this constantly. Most of what I say is speculation until proven. But that we saw this there and we realized and we intuited this is about intuition. Because what is RV? At least in the most best understanding of what RV might be, even in a mainstream interpretation of what remote viewing is, somewhere you're picking up these signals. It's in your environment. It has nothing to do with spookiness, but you're intuiting something with sparse data. That's how we think about it, sparse data. And so then we started looking in the literature, and right about that time, the mainstream literature in medicine was basically saying that this is the area of the brain that lights up when you have an intuitive spark and a moment. So it makes sense then that that the more of these connections that you might have, perhaps the more processing you can do per unit time. So, okay, that's great, but that is there's a lot of bias confirmation in there that, as Mitch would say, that needs to be reckoned with. So what I decided to do, because at that point in time, a lot of the database that Kit had collected, we found out was, in fact, many of these people apparently had actually Havana syndrome and had nothing to do with any anomalous encounters. Havana syndrome is anomalous in and of itself, but so those actually, access to those MRIs, I never had any access to them except for the ones that I put in for my family. But those all got taken away anyway. So I said, okay, well, science has to be reproducible. So what did I do? I hooked up with the neurophysiology lab at Harvard. We went into a totally different database and we then wrote artificial intelligence algorithms that would take an MRI, break it down into where all the regions of the brains are, the caudate putamen, medulla, et cetera, everything. And you can basically figure out what the surface area is, volumes. You can figure out what the connectome is, where one area of the brain has tracks to the other. Because, why do that? Why not just focus on the caudate putamen? That's where you already said that it is, Gary. It's because we know that the brain is a network, and the network has feedback loops, and you might have something smaller here, but you compensate there. If you do have a large caudate putamen and you are processing more information, then you're going to, by necessity, you're going to have a large bandwidth of neurons to pass that information to somewhere else. It just kind of makes sense. So there are these network diagrams that you can automatically find, which we did. And lo and behold, the data held true. Caudate putamen, particularly the caudate volume and size, correlated with intelligence and emotional reasoning and basically dynamic reasoning. So perfectly, and this was all done with British and German data. But we went a step further, because if you want to publish this, the first paper that we're going to publish is not going to be on remote viewers, right? The first paper we're going to publish, and we did publish, was basically just a baseline medical study, and because we infused normality, in the study of normality, with two different diseases, let's say. Not necessarily diseases, but let's just say, well, one of them was schizophrenia, and the other was autism. So we had databases of autistics and databases of schizophrenics with all the same measurements done across them. And lo and behold, there were major differences, and we've published this. So what was I doing there? What was the purpose? Well, first of all, what I think autistics and schizophrenics are, they are extremes of human capabilities. We all know that many autistics have the ability to, any number to the 10th power square root thereof, instantaneously. How the heck they do that, I don't know. On the other hand, you have schizophrenics that see things that aren't supposed to be there, right? Or are highly creative, right? So I found this database, creating that database of what is out there already in the population, is the perfect comparator against which, when it was great to hear who showed that, I think it was Darren maybe who showed that they're collecting a database of individuals who are experiencers and collecting all the MRIs, et cetera. That database would be the perfect now test base. I don't have to go do it myself. You guys would have the data, because now we have a comparison database of what is normal, and where a skeptic might accuse you of basically saying, well, all you did was collect a bunch of schizophrenics, right? Because now I can show that that the structure of the brain of what we now know to be a schizophrenic is different than the structure of the brains of these RV people, right? So the short answer is to the asker, no, we haven't done that yet, but because science needs patience, and we needed to go through the steps to create this normal database and to get it into the literature. I mean, I'm not known as being a brain surgeon or a brain specialist, but now I have another paper of ours just got accepted in this area. Now we have a bit of a track record and the experience to go back in and look at this stuff, and then to do the comparisons that will make sense. Because I can promise you, I will publish a paper on people with RV. So, and I don't care. I'm tenured. I've sold 11 companies. They can go up. And you know what's exciting? And again, I have to credit Mitch here. The number of people who are now starting to be interested in this, that are serious professionals, even in the sciences. I mean, I just went to give a talk at interestingly, the Roswell Institute up in Buffalo. How synchronistic is that? And it's a cancer center. And at dinner, fancy place, the Buffalo Club. God, it was like one of those big fancy, places with lots of wood and everything from the 18th century. And all they wanted to talk about was this, because everybody knows that I do it. So, and it used to be that I would get introduced and be a bit of a giggle about it. And now people use it as, it's like, oh, Gary's willing to do this. And then afterwards, everybody wants to talk about it. So, I think the acclamation that Leslie Kean and Lou and Chris and many others initiated here is beginning to move out, and the ripple effect is broader than you want. Still not where I want it to be, but it doesn't need to be everywhere. I think people who want immediate disclosure, we need a place of solidity with data that can be that can be validated and defended before you go out preaching, because otherwise you truly are just preaching a religion. Because if 30% of the world already believes in what we're talking about in one form or another, the 70% that are caught in a materialist viewpoint, for good reason why they're not convinced yet. And if we think we need to convince them, then we have to take it this slow process. Anyway, that's just my goal.
Thank you so much. The next question we have here is, what are ways to monitor or measure brain functioning during anomalous experiences, evidence of non-physical activity? Is there a method that can help determine what anomalous experiences are probable to occur?
That's like that's a question for a diagnostic in a way. Unless we're all going to wander around with headsets on, or doing basically virtual MRIs or something else. I actually I think it's a great question, so I just don't think that the technology has been invented for it yet. But I would see that more as a challenge, because I often talk about my own work. People say, well, Gary, how did you come up with X or Y to create this or that company? I said, well, I look for the inevitable. I look for what it is, the kind of inevitable data that we want to create or have in our hand, and then I say, okay, well, I can't do it with current instruments or methods, so let's invent a method or an instrument to do it, because then everybody benefits. So, I think what that person is asking for is actually, I know, being developed at DARPA and other places where they are putting together these kinds of things. It doesn't exist now. And part of the problem is the episodic nature of the phenomena. You even if you were wearing such a thing, you might take it off, and that's when it happens, right? Probably this is when it was happening, because the phenomena was waiting for you to take the damn thing off. And so I think it's a great question. It's an inevitable. I don't think 20 years ago we would have been walking around with watches that were, keeping track of all of our biostats. Maybe 20 years from now it will. We will have something that could measure that. I just don't think it's there yet. So that's where I would just end that one.
Thank you so much. And before I pass this off, I was just, we've taken a few from online, and I'm wondering if anybody wants to throw some hands up. And yeah, big surprise, big surprise. Right. Okay, I'm going to start, and then I'm going to pass off to James so that we both get to be equally bad guys.
Please don't put me in the position of choosing.
Oh, no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to. This is the hand I saw first, and this is what we're going to go with.
Yeah, maybe a bit of an unusual question. Once we're talking about skeptics a lot right now. Once our what we call anomalous experiences become non-anomalous, accepted, let's say, by the scientific community, how does that change our ability to experience them, or how often we'll experience them? Personally, I'm just much more concerned in having these experiences, and I wonder if the scientific community at one point starts to agree. Where does that change?
Well, accepting that these things happen, are you asking?
Yeah, well, I would say, most of us here know that they happen already.
Mm-hmm.
my question is, once the scientific community understands or agrees with that, does that change anything with respect to how often they happen or who they happen to? Any perception, on, any opinion on that?
Well, I mean, I think we all kind of understand that once the door is opened, it seems that more things happen. I mean, maybe the swamp, I can't remember the name of the place that was talked about first. You know, maybe things happen there because people go there and make things more happen. Maybe hotspots are because there's a feedback mechanism that's often talked about. You know, I think we have to start to categorize. I mean, maybe one way to approach is to say we have to categorize. We have to say, well, what are these kinds of anomalous experiences that you think might happen? And then you have to have some sort of validation as to whether or not it truly did. Because you do have to basically weed out the people who do have mental health issues. And you don't want everybody with a mental health issue to be able to claim that they have this and then not get the right kind of help that they need. So I don't know the answer to that because it could, you know, in the worst possible world, you know, it's like some bad horror movie that everybody has a Ouija board and, you know, they open the portal to hell, you know, and that's what they were waiting for. So I don't want to be the one to initiate that. Sorry, my secret admirer is going to use that one, I'm sure. Yeah, thanks. All right. There's some VIPs down front here who are going to probably.
Oh, hi. Do you have a theory about the brain being quantum in the sense that if intuitives and remote viewers have more ganglia there, they're picking up a signal that's exterior to the brain, so the brain's more like a receiver than a generator of thought. Do you have any theories about that?
Well, I mean, sure. And, you know, part of the study that we'd done on the caudate putamen was seeing that it is in families, right? So my family, you know. So, yeah, that's the narcissist. I'll put him to rest later. But we found that so if it's 1 in 100 people, more or less, seem to have some density above average. Within our cohort, we had 2 husband-wives, because we actually looked out into their families to look for so-called environmental influences. We had 2 families where both the husband and the wife had, right, out of 20 people. I mean, so just run the numbers in your head. That's just way above what you would expect. So, I mean, you can come up with very mainstream reasons why that might be the case. So you have a limited breeding pool. You know, you met your wife in college. You know, you have to take tests to get there, et cetera. That's not important as to how they found each other. What is important to me is that the brain is architected by genes. If those genes are coming together in synchrony and is being passed to the children, it's not a very complex trait, right? If you understand genetics, it is going to be polygenic at some point, meaning many genes contribute. But it's not so complex that you need to run 100 pairs until you get one that has a child with it. Basically, whatever the groups of genes are that do this, they are relatively easily passed, is the best way to put it. I mean, it's just basically you're 2 smart parents, you have a smart child, 2 smart parents with intuition, you pass it along. So to the extent that RV or any of these other abilities, or telepathy or whatever anybody wants to call it, a receiver is true, then it's going to be architected in the genes, which is what got me excited, you know, way back at the beginning. No, it doesn't explain how it happened at all. No, but that's where I get interested. So it's like, so there's information I don't understand, and then there's information that I do understand, and at least as far as neurophysiologists are concerned, it's electrical signals in the brain, the electrical fields that are created, et cetera. But, you know, plenty of studies have been done that seem to suggest, I mean, some of the early Uri Geller ones, that you can put them in a Faraday cage, which should block all electromagnetics, and it still happens, right? Or it's happening across distances that electromagnetics don't work. It's too far. So, okay, so let's think about this. So that means somewhere in the brain, there is an event or a picture that gets absorbed and incorporated, and it's coming from underneath somewhere. So, how and why is it doing that? And first, how does it do it? That, and how does it put in a complete picture in your brain? I mean, I've done a couple of RVs at May. It floored me. I got the pictures, and I was like, okay, how did it use my internal mental screen and project onto it in a flash that moment, what I saw. So that's really actually what got me interested in this. But it's in the architecture, driven by the schematics and the genes. So what amino acids put together where, distributed across, multiple genes, all somehow come together to create, use the word, the antenna, right? Because it's not like one place. And so, because somehow and somewhere, the information comes from over there, and it ends up over here. Okay, so you say that from a materialist point of view, and people go, oh, well, Gary's, going off again. And believe me, people have said that and worse. So think about the atoms in the amino acids of the proteins of your brain. They're sitting, first of all, they don't exist as objects. They only exist as objects to the extent that they repel or attract other things. They're basically space-time quantum waves of some sort that we don't fully understand, an emergent property of something that's even deeper. And that's pure physics, right? So you're just a bunch of waves, right? That's all you are. And so when I talk to you, when you hear me, when you see me, I'm, at least in the current physics sense, I'm interacting with you with quantum information. It's quantum photons going there. Quantum mechanics is moving the molecules that you hear me by. It's all out there in the woo, right? And that's pure physics. So who's to say that there's not information going from here to there that most people just don't hear? Hoffman's filter, right? And so that some people's architectures of their brains have found a way to access that information because it's evolutionarily advantageous to do so, right? And so, guess who is using that? Big Daddy DOD, right? The so-called, what's the word they use? The people who can basically say, go down this path, not that path, because that path has the spidey sense. Because that path has the IED that will blow ourselves up, and they look for people who do that. They've changed the terminology, but they recognize that people have it. And it's a program in the DoD. I mean, it's been talked about several times in the newspapers. So they're admitting it. They don't understand it, but I don't need to understand it to use it. I don't need to understand it to recognize that there are people who have it. And when you have something like this in biological terms, we call it a phenotype, right? A phenotype is just basically the characteristics that are created by the genotype. And so, so there is a genotype which is creating this phenotype. And so that's what I want to get access to, right? So, I mean, because somewhere there's going to be a gene signature that's going to point to how these brains are created it's a hypothesis. I could be completely wrong, and I'd be completely happy if somebody proves me to be spectacularly wrong, and then I can go on and do other things, right? I mean, I'm not, well, I probably, but, but I'm not here to prove a point. I'm here to determine whether the point is provable. And that's where I think we're going to go with what you asked. And so what is that other information? Is that the non-locality that you just got the Nobel Prize for, a few days ago? Is there some information transfer that we need to understand? Because, again, the practical entrepreneur in me thinks, gee, maybe I can make an instrument that does this, right? I can listen into your thoughts. So anyway, okay.
The sound's a little choppy on it, so just
Okay.
take this mic
Okay.
and make sure you speak to it as loud.
Okay. Okay. Am I okay? All right. If I don't ask him, Bob's gonna, yeah.
I'm going to harangue you in private.
Yeah, exactly.
So, this kind of begs the question, is there sufficient neuroplasticity in the brain so that by some contemplative practice or genetic manipulation, we can increase the density of our caudate Do you believe this?
Okay. So the question was, can we manipulate brain structure in a way to create such abilities or to enhance such abilities? And, so at least in the current data set that we have, where we had a couple of these individuals who had high density, they by chance had prior MRIs taken, and there was no obvious change in those individuals. Okay, but that's not an answer to your question. So we know that with transcranial stimulation, for instance, you can shut things off and turn them on. You can damage an area. In fact, we now know that neuroplasticity is real. I mean, literally 10 or 15 years ago, everybody thought that your brain was locked in place and it was just downhill from here. So I get interested in people, and I think people who have some sort of accident and then they have death or what have you, and then the next day or weeks later, suddenly they start to have these abilities. And so I wonder, and this is just speculation, if the reason that this is happening is because of some kind of neuroplasticity, that they almost have the structure right. The antenna's almost there. They get damage, and then when the brain starts to rewire itself, it fortuitously wires itself into a position where now suddenly they have this ability. That's just a purely medical, it has nothing to do with spirituality or the angel came and reached into your head and rewired you. It's just saying that this is the way that you can explain it. And I'm not saying that it is the way to explain it, I'm saying this is how you could explain it. But if that is the explanation, or that is an explanation, that means that maybe you could go in and purposefully draw with neurochemicals a path to create a neuron that would extend across that area. I mean, this is starting to get into dystopia. I'm sure Elon Musk is listening now, and these neural laces that he's designing are going to do that. So you could imagine that, or perhaps with current transcranial isn't specific enough to do it, but maybe one day, if you needed to, you could. Or I postulated, way back, that maybe you come up with a drug that does it. I mean, for instance, we all know about DMT, LSD, et cetera, that seems to enhance some of these, let's say, visions. And then there was recently published a fantastic paper that they did. The science is just beautiful, where they were able to take a psychedelic and strip the psychedelic of the hallucinatory capability, but keep in it the ability to fix the PTSD. Right? Now, I think that's amazing. It tells you that there's something subtle about it, which means, and this is going to it's going to shock, I think, the 30% community that I talked about before, that they wanted it to be that you needed the hallucination and the trip to ether for you to reconfigure your brain to a non-PTSD state. This basically says that's not true. So that's science. That's, to me, that's good. I mean, because now we can lace the drink of all the Congress people, and they won't know that they've just taken a drug that fixes their lifelong PTSD. I'm never going to get invited to testify in Congress or brief a congressman again. So I've just done myself in. All right, good.
All right, next question.
He's got it. Now, then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, hi. You mentioned earlier about DoD doing research that's related. So I'm wondering about framing this, or the reframing of this whole study, wherein we had a huge citizens sort of arousal of the population about you. And I think it culminated in a major set of conferences called Contact in the Desert, where it was like a Woodstock of citizens. And then in 2017, there's now this reframing of this is what the phenomenon is, and we're going to relabel it as a UAP instead of UFO. And now there's this, government.
Arrow.
That whole story strikes me as trying to take over the narrative from within the government. And it has, that's good that the government get involved, but these are the people that were doing the cover-up, or some of them.
Some of them.
So how do we as the community get past this huge problem?
Well, so I think kind of what you're saying is, how do we stop it from being yet another military venture where something good is turned into something bad, right? And but I think from at least what I know, and you guys are going to hate me for saying this, from what I know on the inside, is that the number of people, and Chris Mellon and Lou have spoken about this openly, the reframing was an excuse to give people a narrative that they could use with their colleagues that wouldn't scare the bejesus out of them, right? And there's not a single person who is really on the inside who doesn't know that there's weirdness right around the corner. I still remember the moment after I got kind of involved and interested in UFOs, and then I somehow saw this connection to there's other strange stuff going on. And I remember thinking to myself at that moment, well, I can believe in this, but I'm not sure I can believe in this. And so, it was even a transition for me to realize that there was a really wide scope of things going on here. And I think all of us, in a way, realize that it's somehow something fundamental to the nature of reality, that somehow we're involved in it. And what that dialectic is, that conversation back and forth of influence back and forth, we've yet to understand. But like I said, I understand the fear, and I see the fear in Twitter. It gets thrown at me actually sometimes. The number of times I've been called a grifter or whatever. I mean, horrific. Well, block, but it's like, look, don't reach for that excuse. Just see that there's good people who are really moving it forward, and that they know how to manipulate the system too. There's no better person than Chris Mellon. He's amazing at this. And, so it's, so I have hope, but I realize though that there are individuals who are trying to crush that hope. And so we just keep moving forward, anyway.
Next question.
So,
Thank you so much. So I want to go back to for a second to the neuroplasticity question. My background's in epidemiology, so I'm always thinking about how do you structure studies to look at this. And one of the things I've been curious about with the narcotic containment research is temporal relationship. So recognizing that you kind of have to go along a path of, kind of study to get where you want to be. Do you have any plans to do a prospective cohort study looking at folks who you train to be remote viewers so you can follow them throughout that process?
I don't, but it seems to me that the individual, I'm sorry, I forget who even showed it. Was that? Sean. That, it looks like that's something that they could do, right? I don't think it's anything that the NIH right now would consider. It wouldn't get even to committee. You should, well, I won't go into that. That's a whole rant all by itself, the NIH. But I am providing through normal paths and through medically good reasons, autism and schizophrenia, it's funded and moving forward, the baseline data set against which those other things can be done. It's going to be donations. It's going to be, frankly, rich individuals who have an interest in this area who will fund it to put it together. And so she had mentioned prospective studies versus retrospective. So the work that we've been publishing on the brain recently has been retrospective, looking backwards. Prospective is looking forward, and usually drugs or other things are approved on the basis of prospective, forward-looking. You basically design the experiment appropriately with clinically considered ethics, et cetera. So, I'm not doing it right now. I've got a lot of other things that you guys will be happy when it all comes out on the, going. But yeah, so if you happen to have any billionaires in your back pocket, send them Sean's way. But I think there's, I think, Dean Radin has done remarkable work, and I think he should be involved in any of the designs of these experiments to make sure that there's no loopholes. But then I frankly would get somebody from the medical community who knows how to design a statistically relevant trial. There's actually a lot of good nurses and other statisticians who work at hospitals that know how it's actually done. The doctors actually often don't even know how it's done.
Here's a question from Benny Adams online. Since your appearance in the 7 News Australia documentary with Ross Coulthart, where you mentioned that there are whistleblowers waiting to testify in front of Congress about, have you had any further conversations since, and are you still confident they'll get an opportunity to reveal what they know?
Yes.
Would you like to go into further detail about that? Just curious.
Oh, yeah, no. Well, look, anybody who's going to come forward is going to know that they are going to put themselves at risk just for their careers, right? And potentially go to jail. So let's be serious. Everybody says, oh, well, if you really cared, you'd come forward. Well, okay, if you're willing to say that and you're willing to go to jail for them, maybe that, that's the cost. Ruined career and, end of everything for your, life, basically. And that's serious. And so, the language is in, the language is agreed to. I think it goes to committee between the House and the Senate soon. And so, assuming they don't strip it out, and they have no reason to, they're too busy fighting over everything else, which is frankly probably a good thing. They're distracted. But sometimes it's when you're distracted that the people who want to do things remove or put things in. So we'll see. But people are looking closely. So once that's done, then it can move forward. Anything else I just shouldn't say. But I'm excited. So please be excited with me. Okay.
Let's take a question back here.
Hey, Gary. Chris Bledsoe has said a few interesting things, namely that he got rheumatoid arthritis through his contact with beans.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so you have the microphone that I had before that's kind of...
Chris Bledsoe has said that through contact with beans, he's got rheumatoid arthritis, and also that he's received a call from somebody sitting directly with the Pope who told him about similar stories from St. Francis in the past. And I was wondering, with talk in the community in the past about electromagnetic frequencies and dealing with this phenomenon, could that be a union between scientists in the biological sciences, kind of showing that these frequencies have effects on human health, and then pointing the physicists into figuring out whether this, can help them figure out the way that these things are operating?
Yeah, well, I think Havana syndrome is purely human, right? I mean, it's somebody who just obviously doesn't care about what they're doing to people, or sociopaths of some kind. But the question is, and things like rheumatoid arthritis or others are usually triggered. There's like a predisposition to autoimmunity, and it is triggered. So my father, for instance, got rheumatoid arthritis from a tick bite, and it was triggered. So I'm deathly afraid of ticks. I just won't go anywhere near them because I have obviously a genetic predisposition just waiting to happen. So I don't know what the trigger was for him. And, I guess the question for Chris would be, does he have blood analyses done for rheumatoid factor prior to these events that he had? Is there rheumatoid arthritis anywhere in his family? And therefore he was genetically predisposed? Or, was the insult that he claims so strong that and blunt-edged that he got it irrespective of the lack of genetic predisposition? So I don't know the answer to it, but what I do know is you don't want to be living next to a transformer, an electric transformer, and you probably, if you're going to try to interact with something anomalous, you're taking a risk. So I don't know what it is that he claims, and I haven't, to be honest, read very much about Chris Bledsoe. I know it's an important thing, but I'm trying to stay focused on the things that I'm good at. I respect everything that they're claiming. I wasn't aware of the autoimmunity issue, so I will actually go look up that, because that does cross section with my interests, my mainstream interests. So, but it does, though. It aligns with the stuff that got me involved in the first place when, frankly, everybody knows this, it was Kit and Colm who showed up in my office. And because they showed up because people were claiming medical harm by interacting with something.
Next question.
We need to just be careful. I need to watch the time. It's just, we're okay for time, right? Oh, good. Plenty of time. 6:48? Oh, good. All right.
Really enjoying this, Gary. And I'd love to ask you, just given the fact that the legislative changes coming in for 2023 include the establishment of a safety mechanism for whistleblowers. You brought up on Tucker Carlson, and you brought up in Ross Coulthart's documentary the Admiral Wilson leaks and the fact that you seem very confident in their legitimacy. And I also found it very interesting that you decided to brief Mike Gallagher, the congressman, on the Admiral Wilson leaks before he went to basically speak to those two Pentagon officials. You move in the same circles as Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, Christopher Mellon, Lou Elizondo. I find it hard to imagine you would do that outside of a blessing from those who are completely involved in that series of leaks. So I'm just wondering what spurred on your decision to publicly speak about your belief that they are authentic, and also to essentially brief a congressman on those leaks before he went to speak to Pentagon officials.
Well, I mean, for all the reasons you mentioned, I was one of the people that one of his staff, said, okay, well, let's go, these other guys, Eric, of course, works at aerospace and is as he said, he's got to be very careful about what he talks about, and his bosses don't want him drawing attention to, inappropriately. So, I mean, I just know Eric, and any of you who know him, and I'm just saying this out of my opinion, he just isn't constructed to lie. And so, I mean, he says some pretty strong things, and I have been the target of some of those strong things at some of the meetings I've been at, and had to go and calm him down, or he used to go calm me down, but that's fine. I mean, that's the kind of positive, friendly engagement, again, that Mitch was talking about, that you want to have. And so, I can believe, I wasn't there, I can't remote view it. I wasn't there, but why would Eric write a document that would go into a folder that would somehow end up in Edgar Mitchell's, keepsakes, that would get revealed later? What possible purpose could he have was he writing a fiction book? I mean, all people have said, oh, he's writing a film. I mean, give me a break. Eric would, I'm sorry, Eric, you'd be the last person I would want to see a story from in that sense. I mean, if you know Eric, I mean, when I first met him, I'll tell the story. I first met him down at Earth Tech. He took me in his office and a lot of stuff, and he went around his room and he said, and this is the book that I read for doing X and Y. And then this is like the first words out of his mouth. And then this is the award that I won for this. And then this is, I was like, who am I talking to? And then, a few years later, I remember being at a lunch, and then a few years later, he recounted word for word what was said at that lunch. I mean, it's just a kind of mind that is so dedicated to specificity. If you've read the things that he's written, it's such a specificity to them that it kind of belies my imagination. I mean, he's somewhere on one of those spectra or on yet another spectra altogether. And so, I mean, that's the basis of, and kind of just, I'm a pretty good read of people. And so I just don't see him lying. Now, whether the content, whether Wilson was given a line by somebody, and Eric was given a line by somebody, and they were basically, it was a folie à deux, the folly of two. I don't know, that they convinced each other that they were talking about something that was real. I don't know, so I can't go there. But, I think that if that's what we're going to rest disclosure on, why are we, I don't even understand why we're bothering talking about it. I mean, again, as a scientist, I look for what is reproducible. I look at all these arguments that historians love to argue about, pieces of paper, are they real or not, et cetera. At a certain point, you have to realize you're not going to prove whether it's real or not. And let's just say, okay, it's part of the data set. But I think I would take kind of Richard Dolan's approach, where it's sort of a meta-analysis of where any individual event you can call out as being true or untrue. But collectively, the entirety of it has a statistical value that it is true, right? That you would have no doubt to do that. And so that's how I see the historical record. I mean, that's why I'm here, not because I've seen 1,000 UFOs, but because I know that there's 1,000 people out there who have no reason to lie about what it is that they saw, right? So it's that kind of, mental, intuitive meta-analysis that, there's lots of statisticians and, how do you know what you know? There's been good books written that you can fool yourself. But, that's why, but then to me, at least from a scientific viewpoint, and this is perhaps the other way that you can talk to your friends and neighbors or colleagues about, is for me, it's sufficient data for what I call a preliminary hypothesis or preliminary data. I mean, some of the stuff that goes into the NIH and the other cancer things and NSF grants that I have read, so flimsy a set of results, basically a few points on a line that lined up based on, and then they come up with a hypothesis of what it means based on 50 references and very, and well-constructed arguments, and they'll get funded because that's preliminary data. And the hypothesis is sufficiently interesting that it might be a high risk, high gain kind of question that it's worth funding. And so I look at this just like a grant. It's like the preliminary data is there. The gain is obvious, right? I mean, so I wrote a think piece for one of the intelligence committees that got passed around up there. And basically I said, look, we're in the position of achieving a virtuous cycle of technology acquisition and knowledge and understanding that we dare not lose to a competing nation. Because, as people have said already about AI, the winner of AI wins the game. The winner of AI might end up, killing us all. But, but I mean, that is, I think, and so that is one of the things that got some of the people in Congress very excited. Because you've heard me say this before, if this technology that we're seeing is real, it represents hundreds or thousands of technology revolutions. And so I'm just somebody who always looks at things and says, how can I take advantage of this? And I start companies and make money and make VCs more money than they ever made myself. But I see it as an opportunity for humanity. But it needs to be pitched as an opportunity for the United States first, and not an opportunity for whoever we consider to be our enemies of the day. And then that's how, basically Chris and Lou constructed it so that they could scare the bejesus out of Congress, who, many of whom actually already had an interest in this area, but now they saw a lever that they could use. So anyway, that's...
Thank you, Jay. We'll take another question from online, and then we'll move back to the room. This is a quote. I respect that you have to walk a fine line with what you can discuss, but considering your connection to quote-unquote insiders, are there any questions that we're not asking as within this community that we should be?
Wow. Okay, you win. That one wins. Well, no, I mean, I think the question, okay, let's just, I mean, I did this at an Esalen conference. That is what, actually in American Cosmic, that's what Diana was referring to when I said, let's just start with the assumption that it's real. What does it mean? So I think the question needs to be asked truly that we have to work through. And it isn't anything you haven't really asked, is what is its intent? Or what is its goal? Because if we can figure out what the intent and or goal is, it might tell us something about the process that's creating it. And it might either allay fears or create necessary fears. Part of what was driving me was, at least at the beginning, and still now, is I didn't like the fact that people were being interfered with against their will. And I felt that if this whole brain architecture thing is right, that maybe there was a way to suppress it, right? Maybe there was a way to interfere with it that would block them from interacting. I have somebody in my family, not my immediate family, but someone in my family who is constantly interacted with by this stuff. And it drives them crazy. I mean, not crazy, but I mean, it's something that is debilitating. And so, so I'm kind of driven by that. I mean, those of you who've seen me online, is I sort of leap in to protect people, and I sort of feel like I want to give people that, first of all, the language to protect themselves, but then also, I've made a drug. One of my drugs is FDA approved. It, took 20 years, but that's how long it takes, and probably like $400 or $500 million. But it takes time to do that. But what really excited me about that psychedelic drug, splitting the psychedelic aspect from the medical positive, is that's maybe a sort of a first route into what the kinds of receptors are that we might block to stop some of these inappropriate interactions. If they really work, Jason.
Next question. All right, and just so you know, 7 o'clock.
Inside joke for some people.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Nolan. So 2 questions. These are derived from Secret Machine books with obviously Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda. One is, I believe you were their genetics advisor. They have a question, or they pose that genocide throughout history has had there's a genetic correlation there. So you have genocide, you have genes, and you have the others. And another question, sorry.
Wait, is that a question?
Yes. So
how is that a question? Where's the question there?
So the question is, they said that they were advised to look at historical genocides as a way to weed out certain genetic lines, not necessarily by humans, but by whoever it is that has been interacting with us.
Okay, so let me get this straight then. So someone is saying that they decided to get rid of X group of individuals, and so they constructed a fight that would accomplish the goal. That's the question. I mean,
yes.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, I can't. Again, I wasn't there, and so and it's so hard to even find any evidence of that in the genetics. Because it's all you would ever get back from a population biologist or a population geneticist is, well, that's just what happened. I mean, where do you ascribe an intent by something? I mean, I'm not saying it didn't or it doesn't happen, but it's just so Tom and whoever, and I like Tom. I was part of TCSA at the beginning, before I had to leave, and I would want to know, is that just something somebody tells you because that's what their conclusion is? Where's the data that allowed them to come to that conclusion? I mean, I talk about data as being, believe the data before you come to a conclusion. But I learned from Jacques directly that conclusions can be, believe it or not, it took me 30 years to learn something that Jacques had, told me. And I sort of realized, okay, yeah, conclusions are disprovable, so keep away from the conclusions. So I just don't know who came up with that narrative. I don't want to tag onto that narrative until I see some data, because it just reeks of eugenics.
Correct.
And I just don't want to hear it until somebody really shows me the data that says it's true. I mean, it's just, I don't want that little girl that was next to Chris Mellon basically essentially appearing virtually here.
Another related question also from Secret Machines that they said that they were advised to look into is that certain genetic lines or ethnic groups have evolved a genetic resistance to genetic tampering.
Genetic tampering or interaction?
Genetic tampering, interaction, or let's say if you're trying to hybridize a particular race of people, they're claiming that there are genetic lines that these others cannot penetrate.
Well, I mean, irrespective of, it's certain. If you, let's say, again, we speculate that the antenna is real. If you don't have the antenna, you won't be interacted with. At least you won't be controlled. Again, speculation. So that would be a genetic selection. That's how you could imagine a genetic selection. But if that capability is somehow required to be a human and interact in normal life, even though you might not be using it to predict IEDs, but you're using it to know whether or not your girlfriend's about to call and you hide the phone or something. Yeah, whoa. Or your boyfriend, or your them friend. To be fully woke. If it's a part of your life that is, if this capability is a part of your life that's needed to function in society, then you can't get rid of it entirely, but you're resistant to it, then maybe. But again, it sounds like a nice conclusion, but I don't know the data on which it's created. And frankly, as we all know, with this kind of trickster narrative, and many of us here have read John Keel. Some of the things, or whatever it is that people seem to be interacting with, are frank liars. And it's very easy to understand how some people would interpret it as the D word, right? And if the entities tell you something, that's not science, first of all, right? It's because it's anecdote. And second, if they did, even just, as a layman, I would question. Because if they're telling you that they're interacting with and driving and directing human evolution, then they're telling you that they're willing to do things that are deceitful and lying, and so I just can't go there. It's just I have to stay in the science. I need to stay on this side of the line. But much as Mitch mentioned, we walk back and forth. It isn't that it doesn't enter my mind as I weave back and forth across the line. And I say, okay, well, it's a possibility. Because I've often said, if you take the possibility off the table, it can't ever be a part of the answer if it is the answer. So, I might assign it a low probability, in my current construction of reality. So I just don't know. I mean, it's interesting, but it just takes me off in so many dark directions that I just feel like I've got more urgent matters that I can prove locally.
Yeah, one more question. Let me go back.
Hey, so you mentioned earlier the idea of boundaries, and how kind of coming through those boundaries, both sides that can bridge those gaps a little easier. A lot of the stuff we're talking about, or that I've heard you mention, is reminiscent of the dream state.
The what?
The dream state.
Yeah.
The kinds of processing that goes on during the dream state. And Matt Walker, I believe, went over the fact that we almost have two different processors completely. One processes rationally, that's physical. And there's another one that processes irrational data, wild data. And that's what the dream state is. And so I'm wondering if there's any correlation you found between REM sleep and intuition and the types of neural activity during REM sleep and that people might be able to have when they're getting this, when they're interpreting the data in a way that allows them to perceive.
Well, I mean, we haven't done any kind of that kind of stuff, but I mean, you've all probably read, How to Change Your Mind, the book, and he talks about the default mode network, which is really when dreaming and this, these dream states and REM states occur, where the default mode network, and basically the mice come out to play. The rest of your subconscious now gets to go running around without the daddy telling them what to do, keeping them all in line. So, I mean, I haven't done it, but I mean, if we're talking about a clinical study that, for instance, Sean or others are interested in doing, that would be something you might want to incorporate as an arm of the trial, where you basically get people who are good at lucid dreaming and see what their activation states look like. I mean, we can now, with these little algorithms that we've written, we can take an MRI and figure out with the right MRI settings, basically your brain structure. I mean, what's interesting is about brains. I could take your brain and somebody else's brain and look at them, and you look like you're from, frankly, different species. They're so different. And yet somehow the network all conforms to make you human, and socially interactable with. And so that's the reason for doing all of this automated determination, because then we can figure out how one change compensates and where another change. But there's still, you probably heard the term, there's still a chaos center, right? It's still, in chaos theory, things will change around a given trajectory, but it always ends up in the same place on average. So brain structures are kind of like a chaos theory in that there's a lot of change and differences, but there's still a central push towards a given type of phenotype and humanity. So, but we need to understand what those compensations are, because I can't use a one-off analysis of one person to come to really any conclusions unless I know what the normal variation is. And so, I would recommend Sean or others wanting to do these kinds of trials is that there's two kinds of questions in science. One kind of way of asking a question is, if the answer is no, you wasted a lot of time. So you constructed the question as sort of a Las Vegas thing. But then there's the Zen question. No matter what the answer is, it's interesting. So if you can design a clinical trial that is interesting no matter what the answer is, and even if that interesting is just creating an atlas and a database against which further studies can be compared, then that's a good thing. So I would just urge you when who's ever trying to do these things is ask the Zen question, because that way, and I teach my students this, every time you answer the question, it's a figure in a paper. The figure in the paper, and then suddenly you've got the 8 figures required, and you go with it. But then if you waste months of your life on a no. But the other thing is, so that's what I learned in my grad school from Len and Lee Herzenberg, and then from David Baltimore at MIT, I learned post facto reorganization of the past, where he would say, well, because he had vast knowledge, he'd say, I got the answer I didn't expect. And so I didn't get the answer I expect. I got an answer I didn't expect, but it's not no. And then he basically says, oh, well, based on this piece of knowledge, I can turn your what is it into something. And so, I mean, that's, I think, the best way to approach what you're asking. I mean, I haven't done it yet, but again, I want to, even if it's not me, I mean, I'm 62 in January. So, thank you. Thank you. It's that alien hybrid DNA. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, I whether I do it or whether we just set the stage for people to do it, that's where I think we could go.
Well, that's our time, Gary. Do you have any parting word for the audience here?
Yes. I mean, thank you all very much. First of all, thanks. I think just, whichever side of the equation you think you are, think about ways to formulate your understanding on your side of the line in ways that the other side can understand. I mean, and that's what I'm trying to do, right? Because I feel like I sit in both worlds, and so I feel like I offer ideas to both. My ideas are not the only way, all right? It's just, It's just a way, not the way. And so, everybody will have their own particular way to approach it. But I guess my best thing is I'm excited about what's coming. And so it drives me. It's driving my mainstream science. We're building an atomic imager, and I think it's going to be useful for a lot of different things, and it's both biology and, studies of things that people don't understand what they are. So that's, to me, the inevitable. Let's move towards what is the inevitable, and the inevitable is going to be disclosure. So I'll close it there.